Welcome to the Emblazers, the show for B2B revenue leaders igniting revenue. I'm your host, Amanda, and I am joined by Tim Reister, who some might call the virtuoso of value creation.
Tim? Triple threat.
The triple threat. Pseudo doctor is what we're going to call you.
Yeah, today we're going to find out that there are real professional doctors doing very legitimate research, and I'm just reporting the news.
You were like reporting the news. It was fun because we had Dr. Leff Bonney on with us today. We've had him on the show. He's our first guest. So if you haven't listened to that, be sure to check it out. So it was a good one. And we also have Dr. Kerr that's joined, who has done research over the last 10 years and aggregated data with, I think, 150 different research reports. That is insane for my little brain to comprehend.
Yeah, what I appreciate is he did what he called a meta-analysis, right? There's so much great research out there in sales. Believe it or not, it's not just all opinion. And any individual piece could kind of alert you one direction or alert you another direction. What I loved about this is he took a look at these 150 studies, as you said, and sort of brought them together and clustered findings to say these things keep rising to the top, and these are the things that should be paid attention to. So really, he did the heavy lifting for us. We can take, it's like I'm going to say Reader's Digest, and half our audience is going to be like, the what? But he summarized, executive summarized 150 studies for us and boiled it down to some concepts we can all take with us from today.
Yeah. So let's take a listen. Boy, oh boy, I am one lucky gal. Not only am I joined by one doctor today, we've got Dr. Leff Bonney on the line with us today, as well as Tim. Our guest today is Dr. Peter Kerr. He's a seasoned expert in Salesforce strategy and performance with over 25 years of experience in strategy planning, marketing, leadership roles. He's formerly vice president of marketing for Bell Canada's small and medium business division, where he managed over $1.2 billion in a portfolio and led a team of over 150 folks. Peter's worked across many diverse industries, including telecommunications, cloud services, and financial services. He holds a PhD from Cranford University in England and an MBA from the University of Western Ontario, where he's been earned a recognition as an Ivy Scholar. Tremendous. He's currently teaching at the University of New Brunswick, where he's recently explored how sales skills have evolved over the past 2 decades. We're excited to dive into that. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And Leff, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us today as a co-host.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And as we were talking about in the setup, can we change the name of the podcast to Two Doctors and Tim? I just think that just has such a catchy ring to it.
It really does. I think we'll put it on a docket for sure.
Yeah, I'm in a doctor sandwich here. No, this is great. Leff, having been our premier guest on our first episode, I guess we've now promoted you to co-host. So there, you did a great job. Dr. Kerr, great to meet you. The article that you put out that we read that kind of got you to the table here, to me just seemed so important. It was like a seminal moment for me to see the work you did in looking at 150 sales studies and over the course of 10 years and netting that out in terms of the differences that have evolved over time, the clusters of things that we should be paying attention to. I kind of likened it to the fable where you're blindfolded and you're touching one part of the elephant, like the tail, and you think it's one thing, and then another person's blindfolded and they're touching the trunk and they think it's another thing, but it's an elephant. And so we're going to get a look at the sales elephant today. The whole thing, the blindfolds are off because you've done the hard work. Tell us a little bit about the methodology, all the things you looked at, and then we'll start diving into some of the findings that I think our audience is going to find fascinating and timely today.
Great. Thanks, Tim, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a really interesting study. I actually did it during the pandemic when, as researchers, we weren't actually allowed to do primary research. We couldn't go out and meet with people face to face. And so I needed to stay productive. So I thought, hey, what can we do? And we were coming up, actually, I had noticed in some other research I had been doing, where we were coming up on the 100th year anniversary of basically sales research. The first piece of sales research was done in 1918, believe it or not. People were looking at the relationship between demographic variables and sales performance. And so this was kind of an interesting time because we had just passed that 100-year anniversary. And I decided to kind of take I wanted to look at the most recent decade to say what's going on, what's important, and has that changed? And, in looking at methodologies, we looked at one thing in particular was something called meta-analysis. And meta-analysis really springs up from the medical sciences, right? And so let me kind of explain it a little bit. I mean, think about all research. All research is flawed in the sense that we have to sample respondents in our population. We can't possibly talk to everybody. So you don't have complete certainty. And so, wow, it would be wonderful if we could take more than one study and somehow statistically bring it together to increase the sample size, increase the precision of our research and the certainty of our research. And in fact, medical researchers had to do that because when they were testing the efficacy of a new drug, a new medication, they didn't want to just rely on a single study. So they would combine maybe 5-10 studies together that were all exploring the same thing and getting a bigger sample that way to assess the performance of this drug. So essentially, we did the same thing. We literally combed every possible academic research database we could find over the decade to look for any studies that were exploring salesperson performance. And it's really important that we understand that was the scope of our research, because there are other forms of sales performance. I can look at performance at a departmental level. I can look at performance even at a deal level. Did the deal close or not close? And so those studies had to be excluded. We were strictly looking for variables that could help predict individual salesperson performance. We came across about 190 studies, and then some of those obviously were qualitative. They didn't have any numeric data we could leverage. And some of them didn't meet the definition that we were looking for. And ultimately, we landed on about 150 studies that we could actually bring together statistically and kind of draw out some conclusions. The other interesting, I think, aspect of meta-analysis is every single finding that you get in an individual study becomes a single record in my data set for my meta-analysis. So those 150 studies turned into 977 records in my data set in terms of being able to conduct an analysis of, to kind of draw some interesting conclusions. The last thing I'll talk about when it comes to meta-analysis that's very important is the conclusions you draw are really driven by the population of the studies that you collect, right? So if a particular variable wasn't analyzed or wasn't studied in that 10-year period, it doesn't show up in my findings. Still could be very important to sales performance, but I don't have it because for whatever reason, it wasn't studied during that time period. Okay, so much of what we're doing, my results are just as much about what was being investigated as what turned out to be incredibly important or to be able to predict performance. So those are the two kind of key areas.
Well, the exhaustive nature of this, I think it's just sometimes a shock to the system of those who spend time in sales to know that this kind of data, this kind of legitimate, rigorous research is there to show us what works and doesn't. Because most times in sales, we're using a study of one, which is me, my experience, and my opinion, and counting it as legitimate data. So thank you for doing the heavy lifting, and to all those 150 studies that made this a legitimate conversation here today. And I just encourage our listeners who basically like to use gut to lean into this to hear what's going on. What would you start with by saying was like the thing that startled you, if anything startled you, the most about what you found and, bumped against your experience? And now you looked at this collective research that I, as a sales leader, a revenue leader, should take home with me today.
That's a good question. So I would say a couple things. We were able to look at the data and kind of identify from the results what are the factors that are, I would say, universally important? In other words, they should be important really in every selling situation versus those factors that are much more, situationally specific. And so, sales leaders need to use their judgment in terms of, is this variable important, more or less important in my space, as they're trying to identify, obviously, the types of skills or other capabilities that they want to hire for. I would say probably the most interesting finding was that something called self-regulation metacognition bubbled to the top, right? Which is a huge mouthful, and probably the best way to describe it, with one variable that really drives home, is something called task-specific self-efficacy. So this is your ability or your belief and your confidence that you can do the particular task you set out to do. Okay, so this was the number one predictor of performance, and that has a number of implications to it. One, I would say this is bubbling to the top now, because I think this is very much tied to motivation. This particular factor, it really drives your internal motor in terms of what motivates you and where you're going to expel your effort on. And I think it's very much linked to things like drive and grit that we hear a lot about now, that people have to have, just because it's tougher out there. There's more competition. It's not as easy to get a call. People have much less time on their hands. And so I think this self-efficacy just needs to, you need confident people. They need to be able to know they're going to get rejected and to keep going and to maintain that cadence, day over day, week over week, right? So I think this is one of the reasons why that certainly bubbled to the top. The other thing I like about
Peter, can I jump in real quick? Like,
please.
As you were saying that, what's so cool about what you're just saying is, I just got through talking to a company about their sales training, right? Like, hey, how good is your sales training?
Yes.
And they said, well, look, we're going to show you our salespeople, like what they say about the training coming out of it. And one of the questions is always basically, did you like the training? And that's what trainers love to show everybody, like, oh, look at all these smiley faces I got. But this company went on to ask, do you think you're going to change your behaviors because of this training? Which I do think that's a good question to ask. But what you just brought up with this idea of, are you confident that when you go to try to do these new things, you're going to be able to pull it off? And I think that's a question that people should be adding into their sort of training surveys here, because to what you just said, like, a seller could hear it, they liked it, they're going to try it, but am I confident in it? I don't know. Right. And what you're saying is it's that third piece that I'm confident I can go pull this off, that actually might be the difference in being successful with that or not. Did I hear that wrong, or would you agree with that sort of summary of the?
I would completely agree with that. And moreover, it's a factor that we actually can influence from a coaching perspective. So we'll talk in a minute or two about other factors that bubble to the top that are really native abilities, that you can't really develop. You need to recruit for them, because these are things people are born with.
So the confidence piece is so important, Leff and Peter. You've now emphasized it from both of your perspectives. But Peter, you said something that I thought was really striking, that confidence can be coached. Confidence can be trained. People can be equipped to be more confident. Feels like something that you either have or you don't have. Mm-hmm. So maybe explain that a little further, since our audience, again, their job is to coach salespeople. And if confidence is a difference maker, how do they coach that?
Well, interesting, Tim. You kind of think about it that way, because there's two types of self-efficacy, right? There's general self-efficacy, and this is just, you're just a confident person, and I would say that's more like a personality trait that you're born with. But task-specific self-efficacy is different, right? These are things that individually we may feel confident that we can do, right? And the things we're talking about are obviously related to your job as a salesperson. And this is probably an area where coaching in the sales area is as close as coaching for athletes, right? How do we instill confidence in our athletes? It would be the same, through practice. In the case of sales, it's practice, it's role playing. It's even having the sales manager do a couple calls, right? One of the biggest areas where we need confidence is in cold calling. Salespeople hate to do it. They don't want to be rejected. They don't like doing it. They would rather focus on existing customers. So we end up with an entire industry of account managers, because that's easier, right? You've already got a relationship. And so being able to demonstrate that, this can be done, and as a coach, starts to give people more confidence that they can perform the same way, they can use the same type of tips and tricks. And when I say tricks, I don't mean manipulative tricks. I just mean, there's a cadence to establishing rapport as well that works in different industries and organizations that the people need to practice.
Role play, modeling, all things that can be driven by the manager to develop that next tier of confidence. I totally get it when you say, like, you show up with a level of confidence that might be innate, but it's the confidence in the tasks, the specific tasks that you know how to do. You know what they are, you know how to do them, you know what good looks like. So that makes a ton of sense. You also talked about things that are innate, that separate successful salespeople from maybe those who are less successful. And so our managers not only coach, they recruit, they hire. And maybe this is an area where you can help enlighten us on what
Yes.
to be looking for.
Well, this is certainly an area we could do more work on, because often what happens is with these personal traits, they get all lumped together when we're doing this kind of work under a single category, and sometimes they cancel each other out. And so sometimes this particular category doesn't rise very high, but even here we were able to get a sense of what is and isn't important. So let me give you some examples, some traits that bubble up particularly high. Empathy. It makes sense, right? Your ability to put yourself in the shoes of your customer in particular, very important. Resilience, which again makes sense. It ties into this idea of grit, right? Emotional intelligence sits under this category as well. Someone who identifies their own emotions and can regulate those, as well as understands the emotions of others, and how to manage conversations through that activity. So those are the examples of areas. I'm just trying to think if there's other ones. Even the fact that even your ability to be coachable is actually an innate trait. Some people are just more coachable than others. And I think a lot has to come down to whether you're intrinsically motivated, you just want to learn. And I think that is something that you're born with, and that makes life easier when there's things that we want to develop, essentially.
Yeah, Leff, I know you've done some research in these areas. Can you add to anything that Dr. Kerr just told us about EQ and empathy and even curiosity and things like that? We were recently having these conversations, so maybe whip a little of that on us if you don't mind.
Well, yeah. So I mean, we've done sessions on talking about EQ, and we did it at the summit last year. It kind of felt like it was a passing it was all the rage. EQ was in the media constantly back in the early 2000s perhaps, and then it kind of seemed like it died away. Interesting, there's not a lot of I've gone in to look up what other sales research has looked into it, and other than people just saying EQ is important, there hasn't been a ton of data on it. So the fact that Peter's able to pick up on it in some of these studies and bubble it up is huge. But the empathy parts, just practically speaking, again, talking to a company the other day, they said in their interview process, what they do is they plant a story in the receptionist that she tells to the prospective candidate while they're in the waiting room. Then when they go in, the interviewer will ask the candidate, "Hey, tell me what you talk about with our receptionist," and kind of almost ask like, "What did you learn?" Kind of what'd you learn kinds of questions, because what he wants to know is, to Peter's point, was there genuine curiosity? Did this person ask more follow-up questions to this receptionist? What were they sort of warm and empathetic to the story that they were telling? And it's a test. I mean, because when you think about how do you screen for empathy in a 1 hour interview or 30-minute, so they kind of put them through a test, and then they come back and say, "Hey, this person knew all the details of the story," and they were very excited about this story for this person, versus a candidate that's like, "Oh, I can't even remember what we talked about 10 minutes ago." So interesting way to maybe screen it in the interview process.
That is a crazy story. That is, you're being interviewed the whole time. You just didn't realize it. And I love using other players along the way to be part of it. Peter, I have to ask this question because it's the let's go back to the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
As you think about the things that are bubbling to the top and making a difference in a world of AI and a
Yes.
world of more digital interactions, like
Yep.
like web conferencing versus in-person meetings.
Yep.
What these feel like things that are still distinctly human and still things that are going to be necessary when the bots take part of our job. Like, talk to me. What are you seeing? What are you seeing from what you learned there that I think will be relevant to sellers in years to come, regardless of where tech goes?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of work still required on that from an academic research perspective. But let me talk about a little bit what I am seeing. So first, we are seeing technology skills show up where a decade ago they weren't on the scoreboard at all. Okay, so that's really important. The other thing we're starting to see is selling related knowledge continued to stay strong, but it's kind of changing. It's not just about you memorizing your product facts, your product features, but it's your ability to research, curate on behalf of the customer, and to be able to kind of differentiate yourself by providing that value almost in a consultative form. So understanding industry practices, use cases that a customer would see of value, and so on. And that's really all around the analytical ability of the salesperson. So we did. I published a study a year before the meta-analysis, which showed analytical skills as being critical to salesperson performance. And this is a skill that nobody has looked at in the literature before at all. In fact, the only time about in 2002, it showed up 5 levels below having a sense of humor as being important, and it was characterized as Excel skills as opposed to analytical skills. So that's about the extent of the work we've done on that. But it really comes down to the fact that, let's face it, we no longer have data is now synchronous. The customer has as much as we do, and so what we do with it and how we manipulate it using a lot of these tools that we have in the sales technology stack to do one of two things: either drive customer insight for ourselves and for the customer, and B, to help us direct our effort to the right customers, to the right pipeline activities. That's really what's driving this need for knowledge and analytical horsepower that has not shown up before, essentially.
Hey, so Peter, you're speaking my language with the name of the article that you wrote called the something around the contingent determinants of salesperson success. And as Tim knows, I'm Mr. Situational. I'm a massive "it depends" guy, and so I don't like the studies that come out and say this is the way to do something or this is the characteristic you should be looking for, because it really does. It depend. It does depend on certain aspects of what industry you're in or what product are you selling, et cetera. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts around what did you find around some of these contingent variables that sometimes do and sometimes don't predict success.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the other thing to keep in mind is this was at a point in time during this decade that we collected. So I suspect these are going to move, up and down as we move forward. So this one I think is very interesting, and it has not shown up in any other meta-analysis studies. Interorganizational skills. So before we used to combine interpersonal skills and interorganizational skills and thought of them as one thing. But they really aren't, right? One is about managing one-on-one relationships, and the other is about managing one-to-many. So this is particularly important in environments where we've got these more complex solutions, longer sales cycles. The salesperson is truly co-creating value with members of his own team as well as members of the other team and the other organization. And you've got to be able to be good at political skills, to be advocating for your client, to be building really high quality networks inside your organization. Because if you're waiting to use the, formal paths of communication, you're never going to get anything done in time for your customer. So I think that's one. Technology skills is showing up still as pretty situationally specific, because you can imagine there are a number of industries still where that, we're not at the leading edge of the use of those. So that's exactly where it is dead center. Selling related knowledge, which I talked about earlier, is a more selling specific, more situationally specific variable. And one that I'm a little bit surprised about which its category is called non-strategic behaviors. And these behaviors, these are the day-to-day cadence things that you have to do as a salesperson to manage your day-to-day. And the reason I think it's showing up where it is, there was a piece of research done that talked about the fact that, in 39% of the cases, it's the salesperson and not actually the product that someone's buying. And I think what's happening is that's where this is showing up, right? And the other 60%, we're still talking about product leaders with clear differentiated features and benefits. And then the opposite side is where it's the salesperson's tenacity and being able to make 12 contacts with the customer before they pick up. Instead of stopping at 4, where the average salesperson stops, and you need to go much further than that, the data says. So I think that's where we see this being situationally specific. So those are, I would say, the main ones that are driving that middle ground right now.
Yeah, can we go back to that one you said, selling knowledge? Can you say a little more about that? Like, how would you define that exactly, and what was the finding around that? If you had,
so this one is, and I talked a little bit about earlier, but this isn't just about product knowledge. This is about competitive knowledge, but I think more and more it's about your ability to research and curate industry knowledge. So, use cases, customer best practices, and being able to have a consultative conversation about how to solve the customer's problem based on what you're seeing going on with your customer base, or other customer bases, right? I mean, I think that's really, really critical.
Yeah, I always like to say that the sellers forget that they often see more people who look like their customer than the customer does, right? The customer is just focused on their business. And when they meet with you, they realize you have hundreds, maybe thousands of other customers. And they're like leaning in going, what are you seeing out there? And how do I compare? And I think that's a perspective, that's a seat that a seller has that they don't take enough advantage of, is to then say, yeah, well, we work with 1,000 other companies that kind of look like you. And this is kind of some of the stuff that's going on out there. And then allow the customer to sort of start self-persuading on whether that's going on in their environment. So being like the benchmarker, or being able to bring, I like to say, elicit some voyeurism out of the audience is that skill. Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. It's absolutely the case, right? I mean, you are in that position, and it's one of the few spaces left from a knowledge perspective that you have, because there's so much public data now that the buyer can get their hands on before they ever just decide to meet with you. But this is an area that you can bring to the table and add value.
Yeah, the world talks about being a consultative seller, a trusted advisor, an insights person. And it's like, okay. But I think we just sort of nailed it, where we're like, okay, there's a lot of information that's readily available that could be extracted out of things other than the seller. What can the seller distinctly bring to the table? And it's aggregating and amassing that kind of insight from your customers, and then sharing that as an experience that your buyer customer can't get. Like they cannot see that, but you do. So, Leff, I know this is also like near and dear to your heart, these sorts of you meant situational skills. The title of the article keeps eluding me, so I'll just call it situational skills. Anything you would add to what Dr. Kerr told us that you think is important for the audience to like connect dots on with the insights we've been hearing?
Well, I mean, I would just say that, obviously in certain industries, some of these things are more important than in others. And even though Peter was studying this at the unit of analysis was the seller's overall performance. But I would argue it'd be interesting if we could get our hands on more and more data around this, that, hey, even at the deal level, there's the situational aspect, like this idea of using these insights and selling knowledge and competitor knowledge. And in some deals that's really important, and in some deals it's not. So getting down to the granular level of deal level distinctions is where I think is the world is heading, in terms of understanding when do we do this versus when do we do that.
So Peter, the situational, being agile, being adaptive, even down to the deal level, sounds really interesting. Sounds like something y'all professors can get away with saying. How does that become practical? What did you learn from your research that manager, coaches, trainers could make all of this a little bit more practical so that a seller feels confident, like you said earlier?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say the most impactful place you can work with is actually with your sales leaders, actually, as opposed to your sales people, believe it or not, because I think that's really where the focal point and where the impact could potentially be, getting your sales leaders where they need to be. And let me give you an example. There's so many, I mean, the problem with all these pieces of research, now I'm like, oh, there's 30 skills I need to hire for now or develop, right? And you get overwhelmed. But I actually think we can borrow from the service research, and which really says, hey, you know what? We can split this into two dimensions. We can look at soft skills, which are the interpersonal skills, the interorganizational skills, and we can look at hard skills, which are the sales-related knowledge, technology skills, cognitive aptitude, and those and analytical abilities. And we break them into those two. And if you think about it as a sales leader, sure, I would love to be in that top right quadrant, high soft skills, high hard skills. And the problem with that is you can't build an entire team of those people. You can't find them, you can't afford them, you can't retain them. Okay. So it's unrealistic to think you're going to have a whole team of superheroes. Right. So the reality is we have to have extraordinary sales success with an average team. Okay. And we obviously don't want to be in the bottom left corner, which is low on both sections. So what you're left with is either basically the two angled quadrants, high and low in either space. So really, my view is you need to decide what's important, and you need to make a conscious trade-off, right? Am I driving? Do I want to hire for soft skills or hire for hard skills? Okay. And we all believe this when it comes to products, right? If we want to have the latest laptop, we know we can't have a 20-inch monitor, and we can't have the we can't have a 5,000 gigabyte hard drive. We're prepared to make that trade-off, but people have the same limitation. Okay. So you need to decide, because if you don't, what happens in our recruiting today, we try to hire for both, and we end up with the compromised candidate. We end up in the dead center of the four quadrants, average at both dimensions. Okay. And so you're not creating a differentiated selling team there. You need to pick one. So clearly that means you're going to be bad on purpose on the other dimension. Okay. So how do you deal with that? Well, you need to do a couple things. You can do job design. Can I change my job to mitigate and minimize the need for that second skill? Okay. Which I would recommend as important to do. We can focus our training. So now I'm not training on everything. I'm training on a narrower set of things to get more traction. Okay. And then I can use, performance management techniques to get model the behaviors I'm looking for, right? So you need to make that trade-off. How do you make that trade-off? You need to look at what your company's value proposition is and decide which of those dimensions is going to be most important when I'm driving my value proposition. So, I mean, that would be my view. It's very counterintuitive. This isn't just the world according to Peter. This is actually based on 6,000 company interviews in the service space that says if you don't make that trade-off, you will stay mediocre forever, basically. So.
Wow. Any last words on that, Leff? That was amazing, by the way. And you helped because you answered the question I was going to ask and I knew what the answer was going to be. Is it hard skills or soft skills? And you were going to say, it depends, because that's what you all do. But Leff, and you did, you said that, but yet you put some meat behind that said you can analyze your customer set, you can analyze your transaction types, how complex, how many people involved, yada, yada. And I think you can maybe get to an answer there. Leff, last words. You're the one who brought the Peter to the table here. You saw something in his work. Anything you want to conclude and round us out with?
Yeah, no, I'll just say that was great, Peter. And I love what you said there at the end, that, the great sales organizations are picking a strategy and driving it all the way down through the organization, right down to who we're selecting for our next sales job. I mean, I think it's that kind of integrated thinking down through the whole sales org that is really what differentiates some of the elites from the, like you said, mediocre. So I think it was great. I thought today was great. I'm really worried, Tim, that I'm gonna get an email that says, "Hey, we're changing the name of the podcast to One Doc and Tim," and I'm gone. I'm worried I'm out of a role here, because that was great, Peter.
It takes a very confident doctor to bring a really brilliant other doctor to the table.
No.
So you win confidence points.
Yeah, but I'm rethinking the strategy. I don't know if I'm going to do it again. That was great, Peter.
Yeah.
I appreciate the time. I really enjoyed it. So thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, Peter. So much information. I don't know if we should have more than 2 doctors per show, because it's just going to be way too great.
Yeah, a a lot to process. But what I liked about these doctors is that I joke they speak our language. They speak the language of like, hey, I did the research, but I'm gonna keep it simple for
They're
you
like
folks.
cool. Good. They have like good bedside doctor
Yeah,
research
yeah.
manner.
I like to say they took the cookies and they put them on the lower shelf, and I'm sure there was a cookie that pleased everybody here today. And one of the things they said is many of the skills required are situational. So maybe you took away a chocolate chip cookie today, maybe you took away a peanut butter cookie today. Can this metaphor go longer?
It can, but I don't think we have that much time on this podcast. I will say one of the things that really resonated with me listening to him, and we've had so many different leaders on the calls, is just honing in on uh, Peter's perspective and the research that is all about training the sales leader. Really is like the key to the success for the sales reps. As to what did you think when he was sharing that?
Yeah. What I liked is he said ultimately that a seller needs to have not just confidence in themselves, but confidence in the job, confidence in the role, the tasks, and the things they're to perform. And the way they get confident is based on what the leader does for them. And so this difference maker of confidence is something that you, the listener, the leader who listens to this podcast, you inspire that or not. And so a little bit of pressure there, but it also says that's all trainable, that's all coachable, and that's good news. And today, hopefully, you got some help in doing that job with your team.
So keep tuning in to the Emblazers show, where we continue to hear from great practitioners like Peter. If you liked our show, please make sure that you like and subscribe. Hey, tell your friends all about us as well, and we'll see you next time on the Emblazers.